Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our press conference. We're going to lead off with Michelle Folkens from Dorchester.
Hi, I am the Regional Coordinator for the Rural Schools Coalition, and here is Marie-Claude Michaud and Paul Bennett, and Marie-Claude will be leading us off with our statement.
Yes, thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate your presence here. First, I will read our statement in English, followed by the French version, and then we'll have some information from Mr. Bennett, and then we'll follow that by question and answers. Communities across New Brunswick are uniting on the front of the proposed rural school closures. Francophones and Anglophones, parents and concerned citizens have come together to form the Rural Schools Coalition in recognition of the importance of our rural cultures. The Rural Schools Coalition is asking the government to place a moratorium on rural school closures. During this time, we would like the government to revise Policy 409 and the process it uses to make a determination on school sustainability. This policy should then focus on what can be done within the community to make those schools more sustainable. It is our belief that single school communities, as are present in many rural areas, should be given the opportunity to initiate community-based programs and engage in fiscal solutions in an effort to sustain rural schools and the culture of rural life. Policy 409 does not provide an opportunity for citizens to offer solutions on issues that affect them on a day-to-day basis. Currently, under the amended Policy 409, there are over 50 schools, both Francophone and Anglophone, that have, are, or will be going through a sustainability review, the majority of them being in rural communities. The first step of the process outlined in Policy 409 requires that the local communities be advised of the upcoming changes. During these initial meetings, our schools were informed by their respective districts that closing our schools was the easiest way to make cuts. This is not responsible management of our children, communities, education system, or finances. As we all know, the easiest choices are usually not the right ones. Our coalition and the residents of small communities with schools poised for closure are expressing a willingness and a passion to work with the province to ensure financial, educational, and cultural sustainability. Is the provincial government willing to work with us? The current policy does not provide fair process, ample time, resources, clear structure, or support for the communities facing school closures. Our research suggests that decisions are currently being made based on inflated estimates on maintenance and repairs, omitted cost, and in some instances, missing data. In several instances that were reviewed by our coalition, when shortcomings were brought to the district's attention, no corrective actions were taken, and important information to support our claim was withheld. We want to ensure that the minister and all stakeholders have the proper information to make the right decision. All citizens, including the children of this province, deserve a fair evaluation of the sustainability of rural schools. Government lacks the realization that the most effective way of instituting positive change is through engagement and collaboration. According to Statistics Canada, 48% of New Brunswick's citizens live in rural communities. Our rural communities provide perspective on a different way of life. Diversity is essential to the success of any society. This coalition is not interested in schools being a burden on society. We are interested in ensuring a rich, diverse culture in New Brunswick. We are interested in working with the provincial government to solve this problem. Do we think there are financial challenges when preserving rural schools? Yes. Are we willing to work with the government to resolve these challenges? Yes. The question is whether the government is willing to postpone the decision-making process to work with citizens to come up with a solution that keeps schools open. Our rural schools are essential in this province and are at the heart of the community. Thank you to all the schools for supporting the movement, some of which sent representatives today, and also some could not attend. And as the coalition is growing, we are reaching more and more schools and getting in contact with more and more schools, some of them who are still discussing with their PSSC and members to take action and see if they will join the coalition. Alors, bonjour à tous et merci d'être ici aujourd'hui avec nous. Des communautés de partout au Nouveau-Brunswick s'unissent pour faire front commun contre les fermetures envisagées d'écoles rurales. Des francophones et des anglophones se sont joints aux parents et aux citoyens engagés et ont formé la coalition des écoles rurales en reconnaissance de l'importance de nos diverses cultures rurales. La coalition des écoles rurales demande au gouvernement d'imposer un moratoire sur la fermeture des écoles rurales. Pendant ce temps, nous voulons que le gouvernement révise la politique 409 et le processus suivi pour déterminer la viabilité d'une école. La politique 409 devrait dorénavant mettre l'accent sur les changements qui peuvent être faits dans la communauté pour améliorer la viabilité de l'école. Nous croyons que les communautés qui n'ont qu'un seul établissement scolaire, une réalité dans bien des collectivités rurales, devraient avoir la chance de mettre en place des programmes communautaires et de trouver des solutions fiscales qui permettraient de soutenir les écoles rurales et la culture de nos régions. La politique 409 ne donne pas la chance aux citoyens de fournir des solutions aux problèmes qui les touchent dans leur vie de tous les jours. Présentement, dans le cadre de la politique 409 modifiée, il y a plus de 50 écoles francophones et anglophones qui ont soit déjà subi une étude de viabilité, qui sont en train d'en subir une ou encore qui en subiront une très bientôt. La majorité de ces écoles se trouvent en milieu rural. Dans la première étape du processus énoncé dans la politique 409, les communautés locales doivent être avisées des changements à venir. Lors de ces premières consultations publiques, des représentants des différents districts scolaires ont annoncé que de fermer nos écoles représentait le moyen le plus facile de faire des coupures budgétaires. Ce qui ne représente pas une gestion judicieuse et responsable de nos enfants, de nos communautés, de notre système d'éducation et de nos finances. Comme nous le savons tous, les choix les plus faciles sont rarement les meilleurs. Notre coalition et les résidents des petites communautés dont les écoles risquent de fermer démontrent une volonté et un désir de travailler avec le gouvernement pour assurer la viabilité tant financière qu'éducative et culturelle de la province. Est-ce que le gouvernement provincial est prêt à travailler avec nous? La politique actuelle n'est pas un processus équitable. Elle n'est pas bien structurée. Elle n'a pas assez de temps, de ressources et de support aux communautés qui font face à la fermeture de leur école. D'après nos recherches, les décisions qui se prennent présentement sont basées sur des estimations de rénovation et d'entretien exagérées, ou encore sur de l'information incomplète. Dans plusieurs cas examinés par la coalition, lorsque ces problèmes étaient signalés au district, aucune correction n'était apportée. De plus, l'information nécessaire à la défense de notre cause ne nous était pas divulguée. Nous voulons nous assurer que le ministre et les intervenants aient l'information nécessaire pour prendre la bonne décision. Tous les citoyens de cette province, y compris les enfants, ont droit à une évaluation juste et équitable de la viabilité des écoles rurales. Le gouvernement ne semble pas comprendre que la collaboration et l'engagement représentent les meilleures façons d'arriver à des changements positifs. Selon Statistique Canada, 48% des habitants du Nouveau-Brunswick habitent dans les régions rurales. Ces petites communautés apportent une perspective différente. La diversité est un élément clé au succès de toute société. Notre coalition ne veut pas que les écoles deviennent un fardeau pour la société. Nous voulons assurer une culture riche et diverse pour tout le Nouveau-Brunswick. Nous voulons travailler avec le gouvernement provincial pour trouver des solutions à ce problème. Sommes-nous conscients des défis financiers que présente la conservation et la préservation des écoles rurales? Oui. Sommes-nous prêts à travailler avec le gouvernement pour résoudre ces problèmes et relever le défi? Oui. Il reste à savoir si le gouvernement est prêt à remettre à plus tard la prise de décision pour travailler avec les citoyens afin de trouver des solutions qui permettront aux écoles de rester ouvertes. Nos écoles rurales sont essentielles dans cette province et sont au cœur même des communautés qu'elles desservent. Nous remercions toutes les écoles qui supportent la coalition. Certaines écoles ont des représentants présents ici aujourd'hui, tandis que d'autres ne pouvaient être des nôtres, et nous sommes encore dans le processus de contacter des écoles et d'attendre des réponses. Alors, la coalition est en train seulement de grandir. Alors, voici la liste des écoles. Here's the list of schools that support the coalition, qui supportent notre coalition. Dorchester Consolidated, Riverside Consolidated, Browns Flat, Coles Island, Penfield Elementary School, Norton, École La Villa des Amis, Harcourt, Lawrence Station, to name a few. Thank you. Merci. Oh, j'aimerais vous présenter, I would like to introduce Professor Paul Bennett, who is a Halifax-based consultant in education. He's also an education professor at St. Mary's University and the author of the book, The Last Stand, Schools, Communities, and the Future of Rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Paul Bennett.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. And I won't be speaking French because I don't want to see you run out the doors. I'm limited to English, so I'll simply say this. What is going on in New Brunswick is a travesty because the school communities have not been given enough time to get their act together and to present viable school sustainability plans. When they've been given as little as 7 weeks to respond to the plans, when it threatens to bus their kids out of their community, and when the very existence of those villages is threatened, then the line has to be drawn. And today, we came together to actually ask 3 things. 1, a moratorium on school closures effective September 2014. 2, a suspension of Policy 409 so that it gives the communities an ample opportunity to respond. And thirdly, a positive proposal, which is we'd like the school review process in Nova Scotia to be considered by the Department of Education because it allows more time, involves the development of community hub schools, and involves the community in a legitimate way in actually taking charge of their future. It's no secret that you've got 12 schools that are currently facing closure and 42 others that are threatened over the next few years with the same fate. If nothing changes, then we're going to have this repeated over and over again. So earlier today, we met with the Minister of Education and shared our concerns, and we'd be willing to give you some of our thoughts. He's decided to take our views under advisement. He's studying the proposals, and he knows exactly what is being presented here today. Very specifically, Policy 409 is a reasonably good document if it's developed further. We need to have more time from the announcement of a decision to put a school under review till its actual closure. A minimum of 6 months is normally expected, and 260 days is required in Nova Scotia. These schools have not been given that opportunity. Secondly, the school sustainability reports that are presented to them are grossly inflate the costs of the school, and the savings are not accurate. For example, in the case of Dorchester, it's said to be $1.8 million. But that includes a staff complement change. It also includes things that are really not part of this process. So the data needs to be re-examined. The information on the size of the student populations is not often accurate. There's no accounting for this additional costs of busing at $50,000 per additional bus. There's no consideration, as there is in Nova Scotia, with the costs of demolition, with the numbers of schools that will be abandoned and the costs that it will be incurred by the taxpayers of this province. There's one thing that's very important. There's one taxpayer in this province, and that's everybody sitting here and everybody watching. And when you shift the costs from one department to another, you're not really saving costs. We think there's revenue generating potential in the communities. We think cost efficiencies can be found if communities are involved at the outset. And we'd like the question to be, we have a common problem, and what can we do together to solve that problem? And it shouldn't be with the threat of a report that says, if you don't comply, you close. That's not the way you engage people. It's not public engagement. So what we're presenting today is, let's turn back the clock on this current round of closures. Let's start again with a new set of procedures. And yes, let's take another 6 months to do it better and to ensure that New Brunswick has the best possible school review policy that you could ever find anywhere. We will take a few questions. We know there are members of the media that might be interested, and you can pose the questions in either English or French, and we're prepared to do what we can to see if we can answer them. So just fire away.
You're focusing on rural schools in general. What about in urban areas? There are a couple scheduled in urban areas, and aren't urban areas where more people are shifting to?
Well, Jacques, 48% of New Brunswickers live in rural communities, and so that is the focus for us. And they're often neglected in this debate. And it's more acute for rural communities when they're down to, say, one church and one school. And it is a matter of life and death when you lose your school. In the urban settings, you sometimes have schools that are in neighborhoods that are reasonably close together. So it's not always a life and death struggle. And there's also other options. But if you're asking me if there are urban neighborhoods that have declining enrollments that could use a community hub concept, yes, I think it applies equally in the urban environments.
Sorry, one more. On the new thresholds the province has announced of 100 students or 30%. Should there be a threshold at all? And if so, what should it be?
Those are commonly accepted. In our meeting with the minister, there was some discussion about this, and I said that that's exactly the rule that exists all over Ontario, for example. Most school boards are asked to put schools under review every year if they fall below 100, and the 30% occupancy is normal. What we object to, though, is 30% of what? We think it could be, the school is probably needs to be repurposed. And so it would be 30% of the total facility, could be 90% of what is really needed for the school, and the rest of the school facility is repurposed with community hub proposals. Example, a business hub, a daycare center, a seniors program, intergenerational learning, and all of these people being asked to contribute in the way of lease payments or entering into a co-op. One of the best things that could come out of this would be that every school has an opportunity to become a co-op and not close. One of the problems with school closures is this, and I know this from my work all over the Maritimes. When you close a school, the momentum, energy, and enthusiasm drains out of the community. And then a year later, you say, now create a community center. Our position is very clear. You cannot take the anchor tenant, the students, and the teachers out of any facility and expect it to survive. You cannot drain everyone of all their energy and their enthusiasm and actually have them move out of the community, then turn around and say we're going to have a community center. It doesn't work. That's why we have white elephants all over the Maritimes where this has not worked. When are we going to stop and say, start the repurposing with the students in the school? That's all we're asking.
J'ai une question en français. Deux questions en fait. La première, c'est il y a des écoles, certaines écoles comme à Pointe-Verte, je crois qu'il y a comme 20 à 30 élèves. Comment des écoles comme ça peuvent être viables aujourd'hui?
Bien, ça rentre dans la même explication que M. Bennett vient de donner. C'est aux communautés de trouver les solutions qui fonctionnent pour leur collectivité. Alors, je ne suis pas familière avec la géographie de Rivière-Verte ou leur démographie ou des choses comme ça, mais je suis sûre qu'il y a des besoins dans cette communauté-là. Le Nouveau-Brunswick, en général, c'est une province vieillissante. J'imagine qu'à Pointe-Verte, il y a Il y a des personnes âgées qui aimeraient peut-être avoir un centre, des personnes âgées qui aimeraient peut-être avoir des bureaux de, je sais pas moi, une infirmière en gériatrie qui vient et qui s'occupe d'eux. C'est à la communauté. Et puis c'est ça qui est intéressant avec ce concept-là, c'est que c'est les communautés qui sont responsables de déterminer c'est quoi le plan d'action, c'est quoi la meilleure façon de rendre nos écoles viables, puis avec le gouvernement de mettre en place ces solutions-là.
Les fermetures d'écoles risquent de toucher à la fois les anglophones et les francophones. Pourtant, dans votre coalition, il y a 11 sur 12 qui sont anglophones. Est-ce que les francophones sont moins inquiets?
Non, mais ce qui est arrivé, c'est que c'est moi qui étais responsable des appels téléphoniques. Alors, je suis encore en train, j'ai rejoint toutes les écoles, mais c'est toujours un peu difficile parce qu'on donne l'information au président ou aux présidentes des différentes CPAE et eux doivent amener cette information-là à leurs membres et ensemble, en tant que conseil, doivent décider qu'est-ce qu'ils font, est-ce qu'ils joignent la coalition ou non. L'intérêt est énorme, mais évidemment, ces gens-là ne voulaient pas prendre la décision pour leur groupe. Hein. C'est un principe démocratique. Alors, j'attends des appels, mais je vous assure que les communautés francophones et puis les écoles francophones étaient très intéressées au travail de la coalition.
There's a difference between procedural fairness and democratic processes and true community engagement. And one of the things that I think is in need of change in Policy 409 is to broaden the definition of public engagement. And it's very, very strict in the way it terms procedural fairness. If you're advised of a meeting, you're given 3 opportunities to make your case, and you are given an opportunity for representation. That sounds like a court. And that's what you're being put through. And what we call it is you have your night of judgment, and you are allowed your piece. And to be honest, I've been to 100 of these meetings over the last 5 years in every corner of the Maritimes. They all run exactly the same way. 99.9% of the people stand up and say, "Save our school," and either the school board or the DEC listens to them. And if one person says, "Maybe we should bus our kids," maybe that person will be listened to, because the decision in many ways has already been made. It's a pointless exercise unless it's preceded with genuine community involvement. Take, for example, the Nova Scotia model, which I think is worth looking at. Here's what happens. You have a long-range planning process involving the community, the mayors, the employers, the heads of the schools, the service clubs, to talk about the future of the school. Everyone is involved. It shouldn't be in response to a recommendation. They develop a community hub plan, or in the case of a school that's very small like yours, it may not be the solution because it may not have the revenue generating potential. Well, that will come out of the discussion. And only if there's a failure to come up with solutions do you go into a school review process, and even then it's called the School Options Committee, and you're involved. There's a mediator, an independent mediator. It's not someone from the DEC. It's not somebody from the province. It's somebody that everyone can trust. And the goal is to come up with solutions. What are the best solutions? The best solutions are always community-based solutions. And we need to find ways of getting to them. For example, in the meetings I've had so far with the groups that I've met with, they've come up with many cost savings and energy efficiency suggestions that aren't in those reports. And how different it would be if those communities were asked. We need to reduce our expenditures. How would you recommend we do it? Instead of being faced with the 56-page PowerPoint, which tells them all the things that are going to be done and says, what do you think of it? Now, imagine yourself. You're sitting there. You've lived in a community your whole life. You'd like to have your children raised there and your grandchildren there. And you hear, all of a sudden, dropping out of the sky, that's going to cost $1.8 million to renovate your school. And you're thinking, wait a minute, that's a lot of deferred maintenance. The people that are telling me that it's going to cost $1.8 million, Weren't they responsible for all that deferred maintenance? So, you have to kind of wonder. Furthermore, it's not 1.8 million. It's much less than that because they're using the staff complements and proposed staff reductions. So it's closer to, most of the average school closes for $150,000 a year. So most people can come up with a plan to defer at least some of those costs. They might be able, I've seen the plans in Nova Scotia, there are 3 schools, River John, it's the River John Discovery Centre, Maitland, a district school, and Wentworth that are in the school hub process right now. And they've all they say they can generate between $50,000 and $90,000 each year for the next 5 years that would be invested in the school, that would be in the community, and would reduce the overall cost. This is what we need to do, change the whole discussion around from building the communities into the solutions. Nobody here, I don't think anybody would have come thinking the status quo was satisfactory. It isn't.
What do you see, I'm from Coles Island with a small group, and what do you see as our best option at this time? Because we are running out of options. The DEC has already suggested and voted to close Coles Island.
Number 1, a moratorium on all school closures going back to September of this year so that we get a do-over. Okay, fundamentally.
If that doesn't work, we've
Well,
been taught and preached civil disobedience. It doesn't work. But in Saint Sauveur and Saint Simon, 20 years ago, they needed police dogs and riot police, and that school is still open. Southern New Brunswick is getting fed up with taking the easy road and bowing out. We're to the point that we need more options than just saying yes, sir, and no, sir.
I just have to be honest with you. That doesn't work because they expect you to get angry and to become extremely upset, and then they can say that you just want to hold on to what you have. Your best option is to go for a moratorium, an improved process, and a genuine opportunity to redevelop your school. And to be honest, it's a long shot for your school. I only wished we'd started this 6 months ago. I think you would have had a fighting chance to have come up with something. But it's never too late. And as far as I'm concerned, I think we've made some headway even today, getting the media to look at positive alternatives, getting them to see that we have 12 schools across the province that are unified on this, and getting to see it's not just a local problem. We're talking about the future of rural New Brunswick here. This is what we're here for. It's not about schools so much. That's the thing that frustrates us. We get talking about this. It's not really often about the school. It's about keeping the kids in the neighborhood. Or as Sherry Fitch says, you heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. No. It takes a child to have a village. That's really what she's teaching us. And we're talking here about driving people out of their homes and moving. They're not going to be there. We've 48% of New Brunswick, and by the way, it's 45% of Nova Scotia. There's no accident, no coincidence that we're at the center of the community hub movement in Canada. This is where the action is happening. It's because we are the last hope, I think, of rural Canada. Ontario, I think it's gone.
On Prince Edward Island, they're actually integrating community groups within the school curriculum, and thus, in exchange, there's space in the school for those community groups. Is that kind of the idea? And if it is, how would you approach those people who would say, we're not really comfortable with adults working in the same building along our children?
It's the first question school administrators ask. Laura, it's that's the first thing. School administrators always say, but we can't have people in the school that we can't take their picture of. rural New Brunswickers, like rural Nova Scotians, trust people. So we start from a position of trust. And that you would likely know most of the people. So that, I know in the big city there's this concern. So that's number one. Number two is we are recommending that the school be partitioned and that have separate entrances for the repurposed areas. So in all of the community hub plans that I've seen, there's a concept, well, the school would be limited to one entrance, the gym, and a few classrooms. And then there would be a partition, a lockable partition to the community space sections. Most principals are actually in favor of that. Now we know after hours that'll be unlocked. So for the purposes of the school day, it probably would be locked. And that is more than enough to satisfy most administrators. Your concept is a good one because it's a two-way hub that we're recommending, which is that the community is not just invited to rent space, they're actually invited to give programs, and some of those programs might be for the kids. So for example, Sherry Fitch in River John is one of this country's finest children's authors. So when she said to the River John community, I'd like to give little talks about my books to River John, the administrators aren't going to say no, because the teachers are studying those books. So they see the opportunities to have, there are people in every community who have something to offer. And I think this is all part of opening the schools to a different relationship with the communities. There's a whole section in my book on what is basically called place-based education. That's what curriculum planners call what we're talking about, which is that the school, if it's going to be small, it's going to be in a community, what the kids are studying should somehow speak to what people in that community are experiencing. It shouldn't be just standardized testing. And what I say is, how could it be that I go to every school across the Maritimes and they're all studying the same things out of the same textbooks? No. Not taking full advantage of small schools and local knowledge. We need to be doing more of that. So if this opens the door to that, it'll be even better.
Where do you guys go from here?
Well, we were discussing, we've had a meeting with the Minister of Education, and he's promised to get back to us, and we don't know much more about that. I would say there's hope here, because we have the opposition parties that are sympathetic to what we're saying. The Conservative leader has called for a moratorium on school closures. I think we've gone a lot further as to why we want that. I think with regard to your New Brunswick Teachers Association, it was encouraging to see the president of your Teachers Association saying that they support small schools. They could be big allies, as they are in British Columbia with the BC Teachers Federation, where they have been consistent in supporting smaller schools. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, it can only get bigger. You know, we're still contacting schools. Schools can contact us. And I think the interest, you know, sometimes you feel isolated in your little community. So as people hear about the coalition, I hope they won't hesitate to call and, you know, get on board. Because the more of us there are, the louder we'll be.
There's going to be a website. We already have one that's been used to organize this particular meeting. It will be a public website. It will be the Rural Schools Coalition with the French and English. It'll be a bilingual website, and it'll be a clearinghouse for everything. Our statements today will be up, and as well as any of the media coverage, and we'll be reaching out to people. It'll be on Facebook and accessible to everyone.
If any of you are willing just to do one-on-one interviews afterwards, I might be able to bring this up there.
All right, I think we've exhausted the questions. I want to thank you so much for coming, and I think we owe Michelle here, who's very modest. Do you realize how much work she's put into this over the last 2 weeks? Why don't we give Michelle sometimes those who talk the most don't do a whole lot of work.
You just stuck here.